Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome everybody to the Amram Scholar Series. I'm so delighted that you're joining us. I want to wish a Mazel Tov. I believe there's a Simcha in Leslie's family. Otherwise, she would be here and joining us. And I want to thank Leslie Maitland again for continually finding us some incredibly timely and important opportunities for us. In Pirkei Avot, we find Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Baseh. All of Israel are responsible one for another. All of humanity is responsible for one for another. That becomes difficult in a world that is polarized. We stand on the threshold of history. In just 2 days, there will be one of the most historic and most participated elections in America's history. At a time when Facebook is embroiled in controversy over election influencing and, quote, fake news, the invasion of privacy, our Amram Scholar Series welcomes top technology writer Stephen Levy for a close look at the social network company. The editor-at-large of Wired magazine, Levy benefited from 3 years of unprecedented access to Facebook's Jewish founder, Mark Zuckerberg, and Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg to write his new book, Facebook, The Inside Story, which I will tell you reads like a mystery novel, even for a non-Facebook user like myself. In his crisp style, Levy takes us through all the steps of the culture, the crisis, and the principles that guided Facebook to its greatest growth and may have allowed itself to be used. You will have all the facts to decide for yourself. Nevertheless, I will tell you, this is a great read. Drawing on hundreds of interviews inside and outside of Facebook, his sweeping narrative explores the full story of the company that has changed the world and reaped the consequences. Described by the New York Times as, quote, front row seat on voracious ambition, end quote, his exploration introduces us to a teenage Zuckerberg fascinated by civilization, an empire-building video game, and Caesar Augustus, an authoritarian Roman emperor. The website Zuckerberg created as a sophomore at Harvard caught on like wildfire, becoming the largest social media platform in the world. Facebook, Levy says, is, and I quote, a 21st century corporate Gatsby, careless in its privileges and self-involved in serving its own needs and pleasures, end quote. Even as rogue actors manipulate it for anti-democratic ends. Widely recognized as one of America's premier writers on technology, Levy was chief technology writer and senior editor for Newsweek, as well as the award-winning author of 7 previous books, including a major history of Google, which I understand is soon going to come out in a paperback version along with this book. We stand on the edge of the most participated election. We will ask for decades to come how we got to its results. No matter what it will be, the role of social media that set the stage in 2016 and 18 will play a critical role in the analysis. No one will be able to comprehend truly Facebook's involvement without Levy's critical work. It is my honor and privilege to give you Stephen Levy. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. That's a lovely introduction. I welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'm only sorry that I can't be there in person, but I'm happy to be able to drop in virtually. You might notice that the backdrop here, this is not my living room or kitchen that I'm showing in the backdrop. This is actually Facebook headquarters. I'm going to shrink down a little. I'm using an interesting new piece of software to do my presentation. You might find me a little fuzzy around the edges because of this software. My wife says I'm fuzzy around the edges anyway, so you're getting the real me, I guess. But this is building 20 of Facebook. It's one of the buildings designed by Frank Gehry. Facebook has had a number of different headquarters in its time. I've been to all of them, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And this building and that we're looking at now is a 1/4 mile long. On the roof, they have foliage. You can take a walk. It feels like you're taking a hike outdoors. Then they built one that was almost identical right next to it. And Zuckerberg and Sandberg and the other executives moved from this one to the other one. The roofs are connected. You can keep walking. And the last time I was there in February, they were well along on building a third one, so the walk can be even longer. Facebook keeps growing and growing and growing, even as the criticism of it grows and grows and grows. And that's what happened in the book. It's interesting. The headquarters before this one it's on the salt marshes of Menlo Park and the peninsula of the Bay Area. And it used to be the Sun campus, Sun Microsystems. It has the famous little sign out there. It's called One Hacker Way. And in the back of this sign, Zuckerberg did not take off the branding of Sun Microsystems. He wanted to keep it there because he said he wanted a reminder that impermanence is part of Silicon Valley. So Facebook shouldn't get complacent and think that it'll be there forever. People come take pictures of themselves in front of the sign. So I want to talk about the book, how I wrote it, and what happened as I was writing it, and talk, obviously about Facebook's promise and its issues, and some of the criticisms that have come its way, and how it came about to earn some of those criticisms. So the first thing that happened, I'm a longtime technology writer, always casting around for something to write about. And I could tell you the exact day that I got interested in writing a book about Facebook. It was August 27th, 2015. Mark Zuckerberg posted this message on his Facebook feed, on that his friends see. And he reported that on that day, 1 billion people had been on Facebook within the last 24 hours. Because he said in there, 1 in 7 people on Earth had used Facebook on that day. And I read that and I was stopped cold. That was amazing. So I'd been covering Facebook for a long time, but I never really thought of it in that way. I knew their ambitions, but to see that happen was striking to me. It was unprecedented that so many people on planet Earth had been on this one social network, run by this small group of people on the same day. You get your World Cup, right, with maybe 1 billion people are on there for like one day, but that's not interactive. They can't communicate with each other. And also the amazing thing was, this wasn't a spike. There was going to be like 1 billion people one day, and then it'll sink back like the World Cup or the Academy Awards, something like that. This is a baseline. Facebook has only got bigger and bigger and bigger. And indeed, now we're talking probably it's twice that every day that are on Facebook and its related properties. So I figured I have to write about this. How did that happen? Who made it happen, and what effect does it have? What does it mean? I felt the complete story of Facebook needed telling. So I thought in order to tell it properly, I would need the cooperation of Facebook to hear it from the horse's mouth. Now, fortunately, I was fairly well placed to make this ask. I'd known Mark Zuckerberg. Here's a picture of us actually in that same building. And I'd known Facebook and Mark for quite a long time. I first met Mark in 2006. I was writing for Newsweek at the time, and I was writing a story about the social web. And Facebook at that point was a network only of college students, and it was just beginning its rise. And I thought I would include him in a larger story I was writing at that time. There he is, at that conference. On the left, and on the right is Esther Dyson, who was running the conference. So I heard he would be there, and I arranged to his people to have lunch with him. And we sat at a big table. It was a lunch for all the people in the conference. We agreed to sit together. He came with one of his officials, this guy named Matt Kohler, who was all of maybe like 4 or 5 years older than him, a senior person at Facebook. Mark was like 21 at the time. And I started asking him the usual questions. Say, tell me about Facebook. How big is it? When did you start? Et cetera, et cetera. And he just stared at me. And I thought, well, am I making myself clear? I asked again, and he didn't say anything. And, I get that weird panic you have when don't know the ground you walk on or anything. And finally, after a couple tries, like I looked across at the table, Matt Kohler, the guy he came with, the guy shrugged, no lifeline. And then I started telling him, I said, Mark, do you know anything about this conference? And he said, no. And I told him about Esther Dyson's conference, and in the past, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates would be there, and and this is now actually it was going to be the last one of the conference. And he was interested in that and was able to perfunctorily answer a couple of my questions, but we broke the ice. So over the next few months, Facebook was rising, and I was writing about it more. And I did a cover story for Newsweek about Facebook. And when I moved to Wired magazine in 2008, left Newsweek, and I wrote a story about updating a book I'd written called Hackers. And I interviewed Mark Zuckerberg for the update, and also Bill Gates, who was in the original book. And we got them together to do a cover shoot for Wired magazine that wound up to be this cover. So we got friendlier and friendlier. Even so, when I pitched Facebook to do this book, and I outlined my vision there, at first they said no. They said, people come to us all the time and we're not interested now. And I kept coming back to them. I wrote a little thing for Mark and Cheryl explaining that what you're doing is historic. And even if it isn't me to write it, you owe it to someone to tell the story, to let them mark this for history, to have an outsider tell the whole narrative of what happened to Facebook. It doesn't even have to be me, but it should be me. And finally, they agreed. And it was just almost like a year to the day after I saw that post that Zuckerberg wrote about 1 billion people being on Facebook the same day, that I started the research of the book. And I went to Africa. They invited me to go to Nigeria with Mark Zuckerberg. And here he is on the first day, really within hours after he arrived at Nigeria. He was going to a coding school for kids. And you don't see me, but I'm in the background there, tracking this and following him around. He's wearing his iconic T-shirt. It's a $300 T-shirt that he wears. He's got a closet full of them. He once posted this picture. Kind of as a jibe at himself. He does have a sense of humor to say how he streamlined his sartorial choices every day. But I followed him around Nigeria a few days, and it was what I call peak Facebook. He was like a national hero. He went out and took a run in the streets, which is something that visiting dignitaries, executives don't usually do in Lagos, Nigeria. And he won the hearts of the town and the country, especially the entrepreneurs he really wanted to meet. And this is a town hall that he ran in Lagos, and all those people in the audience are would-be software magnates like him. And he charmed them and charmed them all, and met with the president, of course. He did bring a suit. And it later struck me that this was, like the moment where he was welcome everywhere. He was the role model for someone building a great company. He built the company on this mission to connect the world. And what could be wrong with that, right? So, it was the best. So I was thinking that this is the story I was going to write, how this company founded by this guy in a Harvard dorm room, the rabbi told you about that, founded the company and brought the world together. Well, 2 months after that was the election. In November 2016, Donald Trump was elected, and people started pointing fingers immediately to Facebook, saying, what did Facebook have to do in that election? Did they help Trump? What was going on there? And I was on a plane the day after the election to go back to California from my home in New York to continue the research of the book. And I attended a conference that Mark spoke at. And this is when he gave that famous quote when the interviewer asked him whether Facebook had anything to do with the election result. And he said, it's crazy. That's the word he used. Crazy to think that Facebook had anything to do with that. Well, we learned in the days and months and years since that maybe it wasn't so crazy to think about that. And we learned that Facebook's influence on us could be very, very deep and not really intended in the way that Mark Zuckerberg thought of when he started the service. We learned that Facebook, besides being a great way to get in touch, keep in touch with your family and your friends from college, and to form groups of your affinity, that it could sow divisiveness and even generate violence and bully people. There's a lot of negative consequences that came of this, and they all came out during the period where I was writing this book. So things changed. My mission in the book changed from going to document how this company built this amazing service and brought the world together, to looking at how, with the best of intentions, things went wrong and how they went wrong. You know, Chekhov, the playwright, says that when you plant a gun in the first act of your play, it's got to go off in Act 3. Well, I was researching my book in Act 3, so I had to go back to Act 1 and find out where the guns were planted. And that was really, you know, my mission in doing this book. As the rabbi said, it was kind of a mystery story, and I wanted to resolve the mystery. So in order to do that, I had to understand Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook's story starts with him, and it doesn't really travel far. Mark is almost synonymous with Facebook. He's always been the person to run it 100%. And when they went public, he structured it so that he controls about 56% of the voting stock. He can't be fired. The board of directors can't fire him. So his word is law. So if you want to understand Facebook, you have to understand Mark Zuckerberg. So that's what I had to do. I set out to understand Mark a little better from the beginning, right? And there's Mark. So Mark grew up in a family that probably a lot of you would be very familiar with. If it's not like your family, you know a lot of families very much like this. He grew up in a suburb of New York City, Dobbs Ferry, you know, with two sisters. And his parents, Karen and Ed Zuckerberg. It's interesting. Both of his parents were, I think, second or third generation, and their parents didn't have much of an education and were, like a lot of Jewish families, obsessed that their kids get a good job, become professionals. They specifically wanted their kids, and this is, you know, individually before Ed and Karen met, to be doctors. You know, and Ed became a dentist, even though he told me he really loved math, and that would have been his preference, to be a mathematician or an engineer. But, you know, he was a good boy. He followed his parents and became a dentist. Same with Karen. She became a psychiatrist. She trained to be a doctor and then a psychiatrist. And she never practiced too long. She practiced only for a few months, and then went to work in the dental office. She said she used her psychiatry to good purpose, and, you know, reassuring the patients that visited Ed, who called himself the painless Dr. Z, in, you know, making them feel comfortable to get the dental work. And it's interesting. Ed took great pride in the technology he used in the dental office. And there's Mark, who was encouraged, you know, because his parents both felt that they acted out of duty for their career choices. They urged all their kids to do whatever you want. Now, as the rabbi said, Mark had some weird idols when he was a kid. He loved Augustus Caesar. He loved conquerors. He loved to play the board game Risk, which is a game of conquest. And he also loved, you won't be surprised to hear, computers. When he was, you know, 10 or 11, he started programming computers. He quickly surpassed what his teachers can do for him. And he had his father take him to a community college where he could take courses. And they hired a computer tutor for him, you know, so he could keep learning more. And he wanted to transfer out of his high school, the pretty good public high school they had in Westchester County, because he needed a better computer program, and he wanted to go to a private school. And his mother told me the story, which I found really instructive as I researched how Facebook operated, that she wanted him very much to go to Horace Mann, which is a private school only a few miles south of where they lived in Dobbs Ferry. His sister was going away that year to Harvard, and she didn't want to lose two kids the same year. She really wanted to keep Mark around. But Mark had heard there was a good program at Phillips Exeter, which is a fancy private school in New England. And he said, I'd like to go there. And his mother said, please, I really would prefer you go to Horace Mann. Could you at least do me the favor of taking a look at it, interviewing there, seeing if you like it? And Mark said, well, I'll take the interview, but I'm going to Exeter. And Mark went to Exeter. And I thought about that a lot as I learned about all the decisions that Mark Zuckerberg made to make Facebook what it is today. You know, when you build a system like this, there's dozens, maybe hundreds of decisions you make, some small, some very big. And sometimes there were decisions that Mark made where he'd have to make a decision whether a product was released and whether it would respect privacy to a certain degree, or maybe not so much. And people sometimes told him, his lieutenants would say, Mark, maybe this isn't a good idea to do it this way. Sometimes they would say to him, maybe it's wrong to do it this way. And he got it in his head that, no, this is what we're going to do. And every time I came across a situation like that, I thought, Exeter. So another thing he wanted in his head was he wanted to go to Harvard, which he did. He went to Harvard. Oh, and that's not, by the way, Mark Zuckerberg. That is Jesse Eisenberg, who played Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network, which is a semi-fictional movie, which some of you might have seen. We could talk about that, maybe the question and answer session. But there he is at Harvard in his dorm room, the famous dorm room where he created Facebook. So it's interesting. Mark will always say, you know, in the past few years, when people say Facebook fell short on this, you didn't anticipate that, he'd say, well, look, we couldn't have expected that. We started out in a dorm room. You know, who knew in 2004, when we started out just doing the students of Harvard, that we would be facing these geopolitical issues? But that's a little coy. The fact is that he was in that dorm room for a few months and started, as I said, in February 2004. By the summer, he was in Silicon Valley. There's the famous Facebook house. Just on the side of my head, you see Mark in a bathing suit. And even though there was a lot of fun, you see that in The Social Network, there was a lot of work going on there. And very early on, they connected with some very powerful people in Silicon Valley. They connected with this guy, Sean Parker, who was a founder of Napster. He put him in touch with some of the most powerful venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. They had other funders like Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, one of the smartest guys in the Valley. And so he had the advice from the very best. So it's a little coy to say that he, you know, was an innocent naive who didn't understand what was going on. He understood a lot about the way you scale companies and grow them and the consequences that can come from that. So I think he has to take responsibility for that. One thing that I found is, you know, there was this great moment in Facebook in 2006, 2 years after it started, where Facebook made two really big leaps. And Mark at the time, I learned, carried around this little notebook with him. And he would always write his plans for Facebook, his product designs in this little notebook that was always with him. And since I was writing a book, I thought, gee, I really would love to see this notebook to get a sense of what's going on, what he was thinking. Then I learned he destroyed the notebook. And I felt that's really unfortunate because I'd learned so much from it. But then I learned also that he copied certain pages and gave them to people. And I wondered whether they kept the pages. So anytime I interviewed someone in the early days of Facebook, I'd ask them, gee, do you have any of those pages that Mark might have shared with you? And they would always get nervous and reluctant to talk about that. But I said, you know, it wouldn't be too bad if at some point someone copied those pages and sent them to me. It wouldn't even need to have a return address. Here's my address just in case that would happen. And one day that did happen. And I got 19 pages of this notebook that turned out to be the most important notebook that Mark wrote, called The Book of Change, where he wrote about two important products. One was called open registration, where he changed Facebook from something only for students to something that everyone in the world could use. And it was fascinating to read about how he envisioned that everyone in the world would have Facebook, and the Facebook would know about someone, even who wasn't on the network, because your friends would share information about you. He talked about it being like a giant government database where everyone would be on it and you'll be able to learn about everyone on it. And there were privacy issues that would come from that. But he wrote one interesting sentence that I flagged. And he said, how do we make this seem secure, even if it's not? The other thing he talked about in the book was the design of the news feed. And this is the stream of information that you see when you go to Facebook. It became the homepage of Facebook. Here he is taking a look at it for the first time. And when it came out, he felt that it would be instantly embraced. And in a way, people did use it more, but they felt that their privacy was violated because information that previously was stored only on their profile page was suddenly shared with their entire network. And when people would log in, you would learn that, oh, this friend broke up with someone, and and this friend is now friends with someone else, and people felt that was a violation of privacy. But Mark felt that, gee, look at the data. People are spending more time on Facebook because of this. So I'm going to tough this out. He made a couple little privacy tweaks and felt that he knew more than the users did. And in that case, he turned out to be right. But maybe that was a lesson that bit back on him. So a couple years after that, he hired Sheryl Sandberg. When he came out with a product in late 2007 called Beacon that was a privacy violation that a lot of people weren't happy with, that he had to backtrack on. And he decided maybe someone more experienced should come on to help me run this company. There was never any question that he was going to be the boss. And Sheryl was an amazingly talented executive at Google, who used to work in DC. She worked for Larry Summers as his chief of staff in the Treasury. And they did this interesting partnership where they would run it together. Sheryl will report to Mark, and they did a very interesting thing to split the company in a way where Sheryl would take charge of things that Mark wasn't particularly interested in, which was creating a business model and dealing with ad customers, and also dealing with some of the policy issues and dealing with Washington. Now, Sheryl is a fascinating character in her own right. Again, comes from a family that a lot of you would probably recognize. She grew up in Florida, upper middle class family, doctors. And some of her siblings are doctors. Her two siblings, her brother and sister. There's Sheryl on the right there. She also, like Mark, went to Harvard. There she is in the center. And I think Sheryl's fascinating because she very much is, a child of the meritocracy. And again, someone you recognize who, even though her parents were professionals, she had a path where she wanted to improve herself and go to Harvard and take on the world. And, she did that. And she went to Harvard and learned the lesson that if you work hard enough, you'll get the A+ and you will succeed. And that was working with her wonderfully until she ran into trouble at Facebook and all the difficulties that came in recent years. Sheryl started this amazing organization, Lean In, but around 2015, she had some setbacks. One was this terrible tragedy of her husband, who was an amazing partner for her, very suddenly died. And it was a very, obviously a horrible tragedy. And it took her a while to get her equilibrium back at Facebook after that. She was, had recovered from that when Facebook had its difficulties, but because of the split of the company, and this is something I found in my research, she felt that she would take care of the things in her domain and maybe not flag them up to Mark where they could be dealt with at the highest level. And some of those were some of the problems that Facebook has now in content moderation and the harm that it could do. Facebook has always been obsessed with growth. That's a Mark Zuckerberg obsession from the time he played Risk. And sometimes they would grow recklessly. They have this motto called move fast and break things. And they would go into countries sometimes, in their expansion, where no one at Facebook knew how to speak the language. In that case, it's very difficult to moderate it. And I talked to people around the world like Maria Ressa, who's an amazing journalist in the Philippines, who warned Facebook very early in 2016 that misinformation is being circulated, in her case in the Philippines, by the person running, for the top office in the country, Duterte, and he won his election and then used Facebook to, do misinformation about his enemies, including Maria. And she warned them that this could happen here in the United States, but the warnings kind of fell on deaf ears at Facebook. And it took years for them to really understand the kind of harm that came from the company. I want to talk a little bit about the election, and what I found about that, the 2016 election, because, that was the turning point for Facebook's reputation and the difficulties it's having now. Facebook's involved in the 2016 election in three ways. First, it was an advertising platform used by both candidates, but the Trump campaign used it so much better than the Clinton campaign. For one thing, Facebook offered both campaigns the opportunity to embed its people into the campaign. The Trump campaign early on saw Facebook as something they're going to put at the centerpiece of their campaign. They took the embed person. The Clinton campaign said, no, we don't need it. And the Trump campaign used Facebook to the maximum. People at Facebook told me that they'd never seen any advertiser use Facebook the way the Trump campaign did in 2016. They did multiple ads. Facebook system lets you do many, many ads. Sometimes they ran over 100,000 different variations of an ad the same day. And they would use a tremendous amount of data about the people they directed the ads to, which is something in the engine that Cheryl built, which was built on knowing a lot of information about its users and using that information to serve them ads and target them in very specific ways. So so the Trump campaign would know this person might be susceptible to an ad about immigration. This person might be susceptible to an ad about taxes. And they would direct that ad to those people, and they would know that other people weren't going to vote for Trump no matter what. And those people they would send ads to just to kind of get them disgusted with the whole electoral system and hopes that they wouldn't vote. We could also talk about whether the Cambridge Analytica scandal was in their targeting. That wasn't so clear. So anyway, that was the first way Facebook was involved in the election. The second way was in disinformation on the platform. So you would see these articles come out from publications that didn't exist about facts that weren't true. The Pope endorsed Donald Trump and things like that. Now, most of those weren't put out by the Trump campaign itself, but they were put out by people trying to make money by get people to come to their pages. It turned out that if you did misinformation that would hurt Donald Trump and help Hillary Clinton, it wouldn't get much pickup. But if you did it from the other side, the right was much more eager to go to those pages. So there were like hundreds and thousands of ads that gave people, misinformation and crazy stuff, that circulated on Facebook. And the third thing that happened was that the Russians used Facebook to use some of that misinformation and to cause chaos really on the platform. And Facebook was slow to realize that. I tell the story how they did figure out that was happening, but they didn't really warn the public about it until it was about to come out. They told Congress about it. They told the FBI about it, but did not share it with its users. And they didn't even tell its own board of directors about it until relatively late. And the board of directors was not happy to hear it. So Facebook says in the current election that they're going to address all these things. They're going to fix all the problems. But we're still seeing a lot of misinformation on Facebook. And even though they've gotten a lot better at identifying it, and they have this war room that they've been running for months, we see in recent days that they're still struggling with how to fight the misinformation. And they've even changed their rules in the last couple of days, making the Biden campaign very upset. And a lot of people feel that Facebook has favored Trump through all this. And I looked on it in the 2016 campaign when Facebook was warned about all the disinformation that was benefiting Trump. And I even tracked down one important meeting where they talked about this and decided not to do anything about it because they felt, well, gee, that would be tilting the playing field towards one candidate. When the fact is, by the misinformation being circulating, the playing field was tilted. By removing the disinformation, they would be leveling it. So you could argue with them about that decision. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about other things that you're going to see on the news about Facebook. As you know, just last week, there was a hearing in Congress about what's known as Section 230. You had the three CEOs of the important content platforms. There's Mark in the lower right. And they were asked about basically whether platforms like Facebook mess with free speech. There's this law, part of the 1996 Computer Decency Act called Section 230, where it gives the platforms the right to act as channels, as message channelers rather than publishers, and they're not responsible for the content unless it's illegal, in which case they have to take it down. And people are thinking that because there's so much misinformation and kind of other problems, we should change that law, and that's what the laws were about. But the hearing turned out to be something where people on the right were arguing about bias. And with complications of that, which I think really is not something that is a valid complaint. And again, something we can talk about. I want to talk about one other thing, since this is something of interest to us as Jews, and it has to do with free speech. And it talks a lot to how Zuckerberg sees free speech and expression on Facebook, and how it even clashes with his Jewish values. Mark believes, he says, in the ability of Facebook to let people express themselves in the freest way possible. And this even comes, traditionally for Mark, in terms of Holocaust denial. Even though, as Jews, it's very, offensive to us that people would be expressing denial of the Holocaust. Mark has traditionally let this happen on his platform. And 2 years ago, when he went to speak on a podcast, he actually came with a piece of paper with talking points he wanted to make. And one of them was saying how he allows people to express Holocaust denial on his platform. He's saying maybe these people are misguided, but I'd like maximum speech on Facebook. So I'm not going to take this down. In the last couple of years, the criticism of Facebook has, I think, rightfully focused on the idea that Facebook should have been and should be more aggressive about making the platform a safe space for its users, and also a more wholesome place for society at large. And this is one reason why the criticism of Facebook is so strong. And we saw just in the last 2 weeks, Mark Zuckerberg has decided to change the policy of Facebook, and for the first time, make Holocaust denial something that, according to its policy, should not exist on Facebook. And you know what? It's a start, and I applaud him for that. So I'm going to welcome your questions now, and thank you. And I'm going to stretch myself a little more here and go back to
Thank you.
that.
That was great. And we're gonna, if you want to either raise your hand. We have about, when you count couples and stuff, a little over 100 and so folks there. So I'm going to begin the process. Um, when you began to do this, I'm just interested, when you looked at both Cheryl and Mark, uh, and their styles, their bringing up, and other things. If you go just a little bit more, here are two. Uh, this sort of the grasping of the intellectual, and you also talk about Mark Zuckerberg held on to certain principles emphatically. Not that we know any Jews that are like that. But so the question is, going and looking at them, how much of an influence was their Jewish background on who they became and how they play things out?
I think it was significant, and I think it's significant that both Mark and Cheryl, um, are very proud of their Jewish heritage. It isn't something that in any way they downplay. They're very upfront with it. I remember once in 2017, Mark decided to go on this journey. Every year he does these things called personal challenges. He actually stopped doing that about a year ago, but each year he said, this is my personal challenge I'm going to work on for this year. And one year he decided to learn Mandarin. And another year he decided, this was a weird one, to not eat meat, except meat that he killed himself. Right. And, it was interesting because I met a woman who sort of was his guru in helping him slaughter animals. And it turned out that this woman and I had both have been at the same college, Temple University, overlapping for a little while. And from a weird coincidence, she turned out to be living next door to a house I was staying during part of the time I was researching the book. So we became friendly, and she shared some stories with me. One year he decided to visit all the states of the United States that he hadn't visited before. And I met up with him towards the end of that year in Kansas. And this was in 2017 when Facebook was undergoing a lot of criticism. And he told me, it was about a month after Yom Kippur, and he told me that he felt that he was atoning. He asked forgiveness for things, during that. And it's an interesting admission to make, and one, I think, maybe Jew to Jew that he made. Cheryl, the same thing. She's very upfront about her heritage. I remember a conversation I had with her when I was fact checking the book, that she stepped out of a bat mitzvah to try to convince me to maybe not to put something in the book, which I wound up putting in anyway. But she made a good case, and because both of them are from this section of Jewry, which I certainly understand from my background. Look, that Ed and Karen, Mark's parents, are very much, I'm their generation. I'm not Mark's generation. And I really related to them because they were the people who I grew up with, and their families are people that I grew up with. And, Mark has not turned his back on that heritage, and neither is Cheryl.
I want to know, going on this, because I think you do just such a great job. And I read twice your chapter on the election. It's just, it really, you can't understand, I believe, the things that are going on the Washington Post and the Senate hearings, whatever, if you don't, as you do, take it all the way back. So, there's one you says, was Facebook ill prepared? You make the claim that it was simply ill prepared. And why was there at Facebook this intellectual fight over neutrality? 2012, it knew it could be a facilitator in political behavior. So I believe, if I remember, there was the study from San Diego, and that they participated willingly, and they were given information that Facebook, between its the people who had not seen the vote button, if you will, and the others, that it was clear that there was a subliminal, whatever it is, there was an influence. And therefore, by 2012, they knew that they had an influence. And the way you describe it is less than making them evil about ambition, but really this commitment to neutrality and being naive about the principles of is that, can you speak to that a little bit? I thought it was fascinating what you laid out.
Yeah, I mean, the key to understanding that, and and pretty much everything in Facebook, is to go back and see how the system was built, right? And so the motivating factors were were growth, and to achieve the mission at great speed, right? One lesson that Mark absorbed very early is in Silicon Valley, the way you win is to grow fast. The Reid Hoffman, the LinkedIn guy who was an advisor of Mark's, he invented this term called Blitz Scaling, right? And so they would go fast at all costs. And one of the things that was, happened very early on Facebook through this news feed was, that things would go viral on Facebook, meaning they would grow very, very fast, right? And you think of things like, there was a picture of someone blowing up a watermelon by putting like a lot of rubber bands around it, and that got like millions and millions of hits. And Facebook thought that was the greatest thing ever. And it has a very active research division where they studied the phenomenon of that and did a scholarly paper about it, called Gesundheit, and about virality. And they thought, again, this is the greatest thing. But what they didn't understand was, by building the system to reward that kind of virality, they, were building something where destructive content could move very, very fast. And as we know, some salacious content, sensational content, people pick up on that more. They get more interested. They're more likely to click on it than boring stuff. So it was a vulnerability that was out in Facebook that they thought was something that worked in a neutral fashion, but that wasn't the case. And when it was pointed out to them, in the case of Maria Ressa, there was another case of anti-vaxxing. People would post about that on Facebook. And it took a very long time for Facebook to change its policy against that, even though that was something that virally, just like it was pushed more and more. And even now, just in the last couple of weeks, someone did a study which showed that compared to even Reddit, which is something that we think of as a source for sometimes the divisive or destructive material, a platform like Facebook will be worse in terms of radicalizing people, because if you show an interest in extreme content, they'll show you even more extreme content, because the way Facebook is built is that it builds out things you like to keep you on the system more and to connect you more with more people with similar likes.
So allowing the disinformation, once you do that, you got tons more disinformation.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it just grows and grows.
Yeah. Our scholar last week, who Eitan Hirsch, brought us statistics and other things of showing that, that in politics, when you scream something like Representative Wilson, who screamed out that Obama was a liar, raised over $2 million in less than 24 hours. So that we gravitate because of our sense of entertainment. And you show out that unwillingly, in a way, that was exploited by the Republican Party, because they took advantage of what was offered to them, and Facebook didn't really respond to that immediately. It seems in some ways, it's fine to say free speech, but we all know that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and it seems that this threshold that was more. One question is, was the reaction of Facebook to your change in view on Facebook and some of the negative coverage? Did you have any feelings of conflict about writing a negative, taking the access to Mark and Cheryl gave you?
Well, I will say that during the course of my research, Facebook, I mean, these are very, very smart people who work there. And they have hundreds of PR people working there. They have a giant communications department. And they knew that the book that I was writing was not going to be the book that I started out to write, because I'm telling the story and it's changing before our eyes, and I'm going to write what's happening. I'm going to write a, an honest book. And they had I learned, some discussions about this, about whether to keep cooperating. And they felt ultimately that they thought I was a fair person, and that I was going to keep writing anyway at that point. And better that I still listen to them present their side of the story, which I think is important to hear, than me just getting it from the outsiders who I was talking to anyway. But don't let them dominate the book. And it was interesting. I would have worried that towards the end of the book, this happened in the middle of the Google book, towards the end of the book, people were getting a little tired of me. And it was getting harder to talk to these people. It was almost the opposite with Facebook. I know that I started doing the writing part of the book in early 2019. And I was still doing some research, and I had wanted to do these big exit interviews with Mark and Cheryl. And I was in actually talking to one of the other executives, and I was in the lobby of, there's many lobbies at Facebook. One where you wait for the top executives, and Cheryl was walking past and she spotted me, and she just literally just grabbed me by the collar and said, "Stephen, this book is so important, the book you're writing." And at that point, I had several interviews with Cheryl, but not a really long one. And the fact is that when you do a very long interview with someone, you really scratch underneath the surface. You really get the honest truth from them. Cheryl is a person who, let's say, gets very prepared in an interview, and you have to kind of break through the veneer to really get to the bottom of what she's thinking. So I said, "Cheryl, what I want to do is I want to interview you for 2 hours." And she said, "What? I mean, I've never done an interview for 2 hours." And I said, "If you really want to try to get across to me, you do that." And to her credit, she did that. And I mean, a couple of people told me, other Facebook executives said, "I looked at Cheryl's calendar and I thought there was a mistake. She's booked for 2 hours with Stephen Levy. How could that be?" And sure enough, by the second hour, it got raw. It got raw, and she needed the Kleenex. I mean, but I feel I got her unvarnished truth about what she was thinking.
So, this is a dilemma of our age. And, Jonathan Sachs, in his new book about morality, talks a lot about some of these aspects. You bring this out in such a way, these college students who had this noble and beautiful idea of connecting the world, envisioned something that nobody else had really envisaged in the same way. And it grew and grew and persevered over time in a very competitive world, and without really business skills and all those things, and created this thing. And you bring out the point that none of them could have anticipated in that noble idea how certain things would be used. And so, in some sense, there is, as they're making decisions and moving along, we tend to forget. And I'd like you to speak a little bit about that. That defense of them, but also in the sense the good that is there, because look, there are kids in that trip to Lagos and whatever. You got kids that Mark Zuckerberg was sitting there and asking them questions. How did you code this? What did you do? Getting people to do things. There's hundreds of entrepreneurs that have come. A platform, certain things. There's there is misinformation that's been taken down, but vaccines and cyber things, questions that we want to ask. We have total access to this, and yes, there's going to be greater need of filter. But can you talk about that being naive, but also the good that's there?
Well, again, as I said earlier, 2004, when they were in the dorm room, certainly that you couldn't see that. And I actually tracked when the first signs that there could be a dark side to Facebook first came up, is when, Facebook in the early days hired college students to be their support people, basically to answer the email that came in when people would say everything from I lost my password to wait a minute, someone's bullying me on Facebook, or there's someone doing something which is bad. And it was and Zuckerberg had no interest really in these complaints. He basically let them to these random college students to come up with basically they did like a short Word document of like, I guess this is bad on Facebook, or we shouldn't let this happen on Facebook. And literally that is the seed from which the current content policy has sprung from. That same document got built upon and formalized. And now they have all sorts of psychologists and PhDs and other kinds of people, weighing in on these policies. But it came from there, but you look at what happened at Facebook and the growth. So very quickly, it was funded for millions of dollars, then built to an IPO. And at that point, hey, you're responsible. You're like a multi-billion-dollar company. You can't call, we're innocent college students at that point. You have to, and we're talking about like the early 2010s when these problems first started happening internationally. And, they were playing all kinds of tricks on growth. Actually, personally, one of my favorite chapters in the book, I don't know whether you agree with it, Rabbi, is to talk about all the tricks that their growth team did, crazy stuff. And sometimes you'll see on your Facebook page, they have this thing called People You May Know. And you'll look at it and you'll say, how the heck do they know that I might know this person? Sometimes Facebook will know someone who you don't even know that you know. I mean, literally, they have all sorts of, voodoo to understand this stuff. And there's even been a case where people looked at it and they're saying, gee, I don't know why I would know this person on the People You May Know little carousel that appears on the news feed. And they later discovered that they were both patients of the same psychiatrist, right? Think about that. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that you figure came about because of this move fast and break things attitude that Facebook had. In fairness for Facebook, that motto came from coding, not from breaking society, but it really came to apply in that sense because they were so reckless, and I use that term advisedly, in the way they grew.
But at the same time, in that recklessness, I was impressed that they did seek to try to have a sense of neutrality. So you described there that after they discovered some of the security issues and some of the things on the platform and how things could be misused, they tried to have people that could monitor things and have a balanced look. So Joel Kaplan, who's a fine and upstanding individual, was brought in because of his connections in terms of what you do point out is that they may have neglected in management of seeing and making sure that those things were done in a certain way, because that was not a college student decision. That was a decision of saying, we're going to bring in people that have worked in these fields, that are in policy. Kaplan, wasn't he on Karl Rove's team at the chief of staff's team, and did policy and other things. So he had a clear understanding in that, and they had a similar person from the Democratic Party, and there was supposed to be this sort of two watchdogs, if you will.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned that. Is Mr. Kaplan a member of your congregation?
He is.
Okay. Or is he? Boy, if he's on the call, I'd love to talk to him. we did have one. I did participate in one conversation with him. It was sort of like a background on some of the election stuff, and then later on when he became an object of more controversy, I tried to talk to him, and he passed on that. And I felt that I would have loved to hear his explanation of that.
More than I'm about Joel's character or lack of character or anything of that nature, because I don't want to get into.
No, I don't want to get into that. But what I'm saying is, you're right that they've spent many millions of dollars to address this situation. They have 15 million people who go over stuff, content, and make these decisions. And recently they started an oversight board that will have the power. They literally last week, they started to hear cases of people whose content is taken down and they're appealing the decisions. And this oversight board of independent people gets to overrule Facebook on these decisions there. So they've done plenty of things. But the question is, the way Facebook was built, will that change things? I'm skeptical that the like basic way Facebook was built, and it was like step by step. They built something to honor virality and the way things move fast on the platform, to make it really difficult, even with the best of intentions, to make the platform, one, where people feel safe and disinformation doesn't thrive. And, it's very difficult to police that particular platform with the way that content moves on it.
So I just want to, because I think that this is one of the things that your book in so many ways helped me, and I think would help others, is that it goes stage by stage of what, from your point of view, how one thing, the action reaction to certain things, and that they were blindsided at certain times following a noble cause. And one of us could say that, I'm going to put the information out there and truth will rise, the cream will rise to the top. But what happened is that people figured out the algorithms and believed that if you put the most sensational thing out there and say the most hypercritical things, that's what people tend to want to look at. The same way in the trigger, and we, newspapers have been doing that for more than 100 years in this country with, sensational headlines in terms of. So they can't be blamed for that part of it. And you do a great job of taking these things out and showing how the
Right.
reaction, it may have been too little too late. And I'm delighted to hear about this situation, but it's the congressional grilling really shows an inept understanding. I wish they had read your book and would understand, because they're being sensational in their grilling and really not getting to solving the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Look, there, and this is one thing, that, this is not a polemic that I wrote. This is a story. And it's just like, to me, the fascinating thing about Facebook and a lot of the companies I cover is their fantastic human stories of human beings. I think, look, I like Mark. I like Cheryl. I feel both of them have the best of intentions. And, they built a company with a technology that we are still trying to grapple with. That hearing, I don't know if any of you saw any of that hearing, but basically, Congress was, just like laying into all these platforms. But the problem is that we're dealing with an unprecedented situation where a technology has given the power to billions of people to express their thoughts all over the world. A random person now can express their thoughts to the world. That's, in a way, one of the most amazing positive things that I feel technology has given us. Peter Thiel, who's on the Facebook board, he once complained, he said, about the progress of technology. He said, boy, you promised us flying cars, but you gave us 140 characters, meaning the length of a tweet. To me, that a tweet, 140 characters that anyone in the world can share with anyone else in the world, is way bigger than flying cars. What an idea, right? And it's such a powerful idea, and powerful also because it is something which isn't, an unalloyed good. It could be bad as well. And, so it's this amazing tool which has come into our hands, that technology has unleashed, that we don't know how to handle.
Well, we were reminded by Thomas Friedman in his last book that the guy in the guy in the booth where he pulls in and out of the metro parking lot had a greater readership for his blog than he did at the particular time, and he stepped back and he reevaluated and looked at that point of it, saying that being late to a Washington thing is an appointment is the best thing you can do. It actually gives us a chance to stop and think. I'd like you in your experience of this time. I didn't really give you a chance. I'm interested. Do you think that these criticisms have changed the culture at is growth still the optimum thing? Has this had an impact on the wake up of the 2016 election, the misuse, the alleged misuse, and the proof there that has come through about how governments used the platform to their advantage to try to influence? And then also, if you will, lift up for us some of the things that impressed you of the good that came out of what they have done.
Sure. Um, I'll do the second one first. Look, there's just no question that, the Facebook executives will, remind you of this, that the vast majority of what happens on Facebook is good stuff. People share things with their families. I have two different Facebook groups, one centered around my wife's side of the family, one centered around my side of the family, where we just share things privately with each other. It's a great platform to do that, and I'm in touch with people I went to from high school on Facebook. It is an amazing tool to stay in touch with people during the pandemic. A lot of us have used Facebook more for keeping in touch with each other. I guess the question is how serious the effects are of the minority of things, which are toxic on Facebook. Is it treated like, just like minor, like setbacks, or is it treated like plane crash kind of stuff, right? So, to the degree that Facebook might have influenced the election, and I don't actually feel that Facebook was the main reason why Donald Trump won in 2016. There were a lot of factors. It was a close election, but but there are things that that happen on Facebook that are serious problems that for a long time Facebook the executives did not take seriously enough. I think they take them seriously now, but it's a very difficult process to go down the path of eliminating them when you've built this system, again, as I mentioned before, that welcomes all kinds of content and accelerates content that people just have this eagerness to see, right? So it's it sounds benign to say, hey, we're giving people what they want to see, but human psychology plays into this to a degree. The degree to which they know about you, that enables from their ad system, and which is open to politicians, how you're targeted. These are problems that the company, I think, is seriously grappling with. And I'm eager to see a postmortem about how they do in this particular election.
It's very interesting because as I read this and read your account, and I think you're you and Facebook in some ways are a vestige of what was once part of our ethos, which was a sense of presenting the facts and the neutrality and then responding to it. These are a group of young billionaires that could have tried to co-opt their what they created to influence things in the way they thought they should do. But what they chose instead was stepping back and saying, let's try to do this in a fair sort of way. They invited Republican leadership in to say, tell us what your criticisms are. They tried, from what you presented, it certainly was an attempt at a balanced attempt on that issue. When you look at this, do you, and I'm asking you to look in your crystal ball, do you see that is the power of Facebook growing? Is it diminished? Is the we no longer have, as I'll quote Jonathan Sachs again in one of his pieces, he talks that we no longer broadcast news, we narrowcast news. And that is we have everybody goes to the flavor of the station of to hear what they want to hear. I think it was, Jonathan Haddett, who wrote The Righteous Mind and Coddling of the American Mind, really talks about that we follow the things that we want to hear, where Facebook, in a sense, tried to create that balance sort of things. What is happening? Are we going to have a balance, or are we moving towards a greater polarization because of social media?
Yeah, I'll answer that. But first, I want to go. I realize I didn't fully answer the other part of your question about the culture of Facebook. I think the culture is changed, and I think that one challenge for Facebook is the criticism the company has, and some of the behavior it's engaged with has upset its own employees. So Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg is getting pushback from some of his own employees. And I think even more than the challenge he's getting from outside critics and even potential regulators, this is a threat to him. He's still a very ambitious person. He still looks over the horizon. He wants Facebook to be an important power 10 years from now, 20 years from now. He bought a company in 2014 because it's a virtual reality company, because he felt that in 10 years, virtual reality might be the next mobile computing and the next powerful platform. So in order to fulfill his vision, he needs the very best engineers, and he has to, make them committed to his mission. These are people that can go anywhere. And if they feel that Facebook isn't an honorable place to work, they will leave. They're very much in demand. So as for your other question, well, I think that, you're right. Facebook, wants to not be known as, like a place favoring the left or favoring the right. But in making the platform safe and, and healthy for society, it has to make choices. The fact is that we are, this is, it might sound political, from my end, but, misinformation isn't balanced between parties. I think that the data shows that. And that, so if you're moving against disinformation, one party is going to be more unhappy than the other. And I think that's what we saw in that hearing. They felt that Facebook says we're going to fact check information and take down stuff which is, wrong and destructive. We're going to take down misinformation about voting. One side of the aisle it doesn't like that. And so they have to stick to their guns and stick to their policies, and withstand those people who say, well, that isn't neutral. And I guess you could say, it's not neutral to say we don't want, bad stuff. We don't want Holocaust denial, right? We're going to take a stand that we're not going to be neutral about Holocaust denial. We're not going to be neutral about anti-vaxxing. And they, maybe should be more aggressive about expanding that suite of issues where they will not be neutral.
What is clear from your book and from what's going on now is that our government is ill-equipped to be the regulator, because they're so far the technology has changed and grew into something. And even when in the effort to create government or to create victory, it was misused. There's no regulation in those parts. And therefore, it seems that it's almost, we're asking for the self-regulation of these companies in terms of, at the same time, in a culture that says that for growth and for profit in America, we can suspend almost anything. So there has to be a reckoning, and I'm it's 2020 may be the time. The pandemic may be the one that'll give us that moment, a reckoning on social justice and racial equality, a reckoning on communication, that we can't just say what we want to say. We can't keep saying lies and pretend that they're the truth. And Zuckerberg and others in the technology world, they have a responsibility, but we as citizens who engage in these things have a responsibility as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with that. I think that, um, uh, you know, it's difficult for Congress, particularly when, the way Congress operates, you see these hearings, and sometimes people just like to talk, not ask questions, and stuff to get things done. I personally feel it's misguided to try to say, the solution to these very, very tough issues is we have to regulate Facebook, we have to regulate Google, we have to regulate Amazon. I think that what we have to do is make sure that citizens are protected from abuses of the technology in general. And if we do that, if for instance, if we have, better laws about privacy, companies like Facebook will follow those laws, and they might have to change some of their practices, but they will follow along. So it really isn't saying, if we hurt Facebook, we'll solve our privacy problem. We have to start from the other end of it and say, how do we protect our people? Now that technology has these tools that could be used against them, and then rely on or those platforms to follow those new laws and enforce the laws. So if they violate them, they have to pay the price.
I'm going to invite, if anybody wants to raise their hand. We're closing in on our time. I've got some questions which I've that I've tried to put in, but we've turned in our scrolls to the book of Genesis. And early on, it's clear that the Bible for us over and over reminds us that we have free will. We're given all sorts of things, and we have to determine how we will use that goodness. Mark Zuckerberg, in his brilliance and in Facebook's growth, have given us an unbelievable tool in which, in an instant, as you said, billions of people can be informed. And it is our responsibility as a society to really harness that. I think you've done a great job for us, and I want to commend you. This must have been an incredible task to do. The book, ladies and gentlemen, is a great read. And when I say that is, I complain to him because, I have to read one of these big books every week for Scholar Series, and then I have other reading to do to teach and whatever. So I've become a fairly good skimmer. On this book, you can't skim. You're going to be engrossed. And then when you read another chapter in terms of it, and he brings up a particular point, you go back, and I reread the election chapter after I listened for 15 minutes to the news and said, wait a minute, that's not the point. That's not the issue. So the clarity, as I said in my introduction, in years to come, whatever happens on this election day, on Tuesday, it's going to take the clarification of how social media did or did not play into that will take decades for historians and sociologists and political scientists to analyze. They will not be able to do sufficient analysis of that without the critical work that has been done by Stephen Levy. I want to commend you for giving us this gift. It's an incredibly timely book. It is well written. And I hope that you will, this type of journalism this type of research and work with your gifts as a writer is what we need. Can I ask you what you're planning on tackling next?
Well, that's interesting. I don't have another book topic yet. My book tour, ended rather abruptly in March. As you, and I quickly became kind of a COVID reporter. Wired, is all over the, writing about the pandemic. And I sort of sat in with the science team for a while. I interviewed Anthony Fauci a couple times, and epidemiologist Larry Brilliant. I talked to Bill Gates about the pandemic. So I'm going to cover this thread and other technology stuff until I find a book. And believe me, it's tough not traveling like I used to for the reporting, and particularly tough that I'm not with you all tonight. I would have loved to visited you and seen you all in person and shaking your hand, Rabbi.
Well, we want to. I hope that even though that we're on this venue, that you feel our esteem. This is it's an incredible work, and you should be really, really proud. Your dad may have missed the Super Bowl win by the Philadelphia team, but I will tell you, they had to have known and been incredibly proud of your integrity as a writer, your gifts as a writer. And I personally am very grateful. I've looked at, your two books, the Google book and this book. And for somebody who's a non-techie, in terms of, I love your narrative style and what you've done. And this is really an important book for all of us to read now and to think about. What you emphasize, and this is the succession of the things that we have. Next, coming up next, I've got to find my piece of paper here. Our next scholar series, which is going to come up, is Suzanne. I've got it here somewhere. I'm missing it, but I don't have my little piece of paper. It'll come up in our last piece. She's going to be on November 8th, which is she's a writer on free speech, and it's the succession. Last week, we listened to Eitan Hirsch, who really told us that if we didn't treat politics as entertainment and we were actually activists, the social media wouldn't have the influence that it has, because we would, and you make the same point, is that it's only by our looking at these sensationalist topics and things that feeds that platform in that sense. I want to thank Mr. Levy for doing this. I want to remind everybody, and there's something that's going to come up on the screen on Monday, on this coming Monday evening, tomorrow evening at 7:15. We hope you will join us. We're doing a prayer service seeking the sacred prayers for the unity of our nation. We choose to do this before the election so we can be sure to be bipartisan in any form or fashion. That we really hope that that we can emphasize what Lincoln said, that is a government for the people, of the people, and by the people, so that it shall not perish from this earth. And we all have a responsibility in how we handle whatever the results of whatever election. And Wednesday, November 4th, there'll be our new website is launched tomorrow. Take a look at it. It may take a little bit of navigating, but what I love about it is you can go in right away and you can just search wherever you want, and it finds it for you without having you to go through every little piece. There'll be orientations at 7 p.m. on Wednesday and 12:30 in the afternoon on November 5th. On Thursday, Cantor Manovich has a Julian Milkus, who is magnificent. He has played, he's a childhood friend of Cantor Manovich, and he's a world-renowned clarinetist, and it should be magnificent. I asked Cantor Manovich to put together a series for us on music and spirituality. So that is Thursday, November 5th at 7. To Stephen Levy, we thank you so much for doing this for us. And I hope people, it's a great book, not only to read, but to give. And we thank you. And I wish everybody, to Samantha for running our technology, and to Leslie Maitland for doing such a fabulous job with the Jewish Book Council, for giving us these opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good evening. Be safe. Please join us as we pray for our nation and as we pray for healing, pray for unity for our nation. I wish you a good evening. Stephen, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Thank you.